Man, their hangout in the van was lit. Alright, so today we're going to be taking a look at my favorite horror movie, The Texas Chain Saw Massacre, released in 1974. And before we get into that, I wanted to briefly say Happy Halloween, everyone. I hope that everyone has a fun time, or has already had a fun time. But yeah, Happy Halloween 2022. So getting into this, I'm sure that if you followed my channel, you'll know that I'm a big Friday the 13th fan. It is my favorite horror series, and Jason my favorite horror character, but this movie is my favorite horror movie. And not only am I here to tell you about my thoughts on the movie, but I'm here to tell you why it's my favorite horror movie. So this movie was directed by Tobe Hooper, who kind of had the idea come from an experience he had while shopping, I believe around Christmas time, where, you know, there were these long lines and big crowds, and one of the ways that he thought about getting through the crowd was chainsawing through people, which is certainly one way to get through, I suppose. But yeah, that very basic idea sort of led to this. One thing that was very interesting that this movie did was marketing itself as being inspired by true events and saying that the stuff that happened in this movie is real, which I'll get into it a bit later, but obviously that's very false. But getting into the movie itself, the film follows Sally Hardesty, her brother Franklin, and their friends Jerry, Kirk, and Pam as they visit a graveyard where some family is located after hearing reports of vandalism and grave robbing. Once they've done that, they decide to go visit the old family home, and along the way they pick up a hitchhiker. This guy very quickly shows that he's very off and talks about his family and working at the old slaughterhouse and whatnot. He cuts himself with Franklin's pocket knife, takes a picture of them, and then demands that they pay him for it, even though they don't want the picture. So he just burns the picture, cuts Franklin's arm, and then he is kicked out of the van. They stop at a gas station to refuel, but unfortunately the place is out of gas. And they also indulge in some local cuisine. They finally arrive at the old home, and Kirk and Pam decide to go to a swimming hole. They find a house along the way, and Kirk goes up to ask for some gas. He decides to just open up the door and go into the house, and he hears strange noises. He fully enters the house and runs in and meets Leatherface, who knocks him in the head with a sledgehammer and pulls him into a room. Pam goes to see what happened to Kirk and accidentally trips into a room filled with furniture made from human bones. She tries to escape, but Leatherface catches her, takes her inside, and impales her on a meat hook, and she is forced to watch as Leatherface cuts up Kirk with a chainsaw. As the sun is starting to set, Jerry goes out to find them and eventually finds the same house and just walks in. He goes into a kitchen and hears knocking in a freezer where he finds Pam, but Leatherface enters the room very quickly and kills him with a hammer. It's dark out and Sally and Franklin are waiting at the van, which they can't drive because they don't have the keys, so they set out to find everyone else. They are greeted by Leatherface, who kills Franklin with the chainsaw, and a chase ensues with Sally going into Leatherface's home and is chased out and back to the gas station. She runs into the same guy that greeted them earlier. She notices some strange stuff cooking in the gas station, and she is captured by the old man and taken back to the house. There, they are met by Leatherface and the hitchhiker. Sally is tied up and relentlessly taunted. Leatherface and the hitchhiker go grab Grandpa from upstairs, who is somehow alive, and feed him some of Sally's blood. They set up the dinner table and begin tormenting Sally even more. They eventually decide to let Grandpa kill her since he's the best one there ever was, but because of, well, look at him. She is able to escape by jumping through a window where she is chased by Leatherface and the hitchhiker. The hitchhiker is hit by a truck, and Leatherface chases around Sally and the truck driver until someone in a pickup truck stops and lets Sally into the back. Sally escapes, laughing hysterically as Leatherface flails around with his chainsaw as the sun comes up. Getting into the characters, I will say there's not too much to say about a lot of them. Like the main group of kids, you know, they're all whatever. Like Jerry and Kirk are just kind of there. They're the guys, you know. Pam is almost the same thing, except she's a girl. Sally is a decent enough survivor girl. She's got some great screams for a horror movie, and Marilyn Burns, she's great in the part, especially with everything she has to do during the dinner scene. Franklin, I just don't like Franklin. I totally acknowledge that he is kind of right with a lot of stuff, but he's just so annoying and frustrating that despite him being correct a good bit of the time, I'm very happy to see Leatherface get him with the chainsaw. But there's the family that are just known as the cook, the hitchhiker, and of course Leatherface in this movie. Later on, the cook will get a proper name in Drayton Sawyer, and I know the hitchhiker has been referred to as Nubbins in some other movies. The hitchhiker, very unhinged, he's played very well, pretty unpredictable, and I think he's pretty scary. And kind of the same thing with Drayton. Even though he tries to say that he doesn't take any pleasure in killing, he comes off as being pretty sadistic, just with how he likes to beat Sally with the broom and what he does to the hitchhiker. He just smacks around Leatherface. You could definitely argue that he's the scary one of the family. But then of course there's the big man himself, Leatherface. He is great, played by Gunnar Hansen here, and just between the size and of course just the wearing human skin on his face, he's awesome, and it's easy to see why Leatherface is the horror icon that he is today. And he really set the standard for a lot of slasher characters of being a big silent guy wearing some form of mask going after people. Of course he's a bit different because you can tell he's afraid of his family, and it's so weird because even though Leatherface does kill in the movie, to a point you can kind of feel bad for him because you can tell he's definitely mentally challenged and he's just being bullied by his family. So in a lot of ways he is a victim himself, even though that obviously doesn't excuse what he's doing. And of course, let's get to the kills, and obviously there's the whole thing of like, it's called the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, but there's only one kill with the chainsaw in the movie, that of course being Franklin. For me, hands down, the best one is the first kill with Kirk, because it's just such a shocker and just seems so real. The, quite frankly, sick sound of that sledgehammer smacking into his head is just, ugh. You don't really see what happens to Pam. Obviously, Jerry gets messed up. You obviously know what's happening to Franklin, but you don't really see it. The Hitchhikers is pretty good. It's a very visceral death with the truck. Of course, this movie is kind of infamous for having such a reputation, but not really being all that violent, at least in terms of gore and what is actually shown on screen, because there's hardly even any blood. And that comes from the fact that Tobe Hooper was trying to aim for this movie to get a PG rating. Of course, back then, a PG rating was pretty different because it was PG and then R. You know, there was no PG-13 yet. And you know, I think it has the reputation that it does just because of how everything is presented. Because again, you don't really see much, but I almost feel like how the movie sort of affects you mentally makes you think that everything was worse than it actually was. And that leads into another thing about this movie, just the feeling of it, the look of it. The one description in this movie I've always enjoyed was how it just looked like something that you shouldn't really be watching. Like it was something found in like an old basement that made you just uncomfortable to see, like some sort of snuff film you found in like an abandoned house or something, I don't know. And it totally looks like that. It just looks grainy, and then it was very hot while they were filming this movie, and I feel like you can just feel that through the film just with how a lot of characters look. You know, it looks hot. And then with the dinner scene, they shot for over 24 hours, and it got so hot in there that the real meat that they had on the table was turning bad just because of how hot it was outside, and then of course getting hot inside of the house, and then the addition of all the lights that they needed. The filming conditions can really be felt, and then they used real bones in the scene where Pam falls into the room. That's actually a real dead body up there with Grandpa, just because it was cheaper to use a real one rather than make a fake one or get a fake one. This movie has quite an atmosphere to it, and just this level of grit that I haven't really seen in many other, at least mainstream, I guess you could say, horror movies. Like, it was a movie where a friend of mine watched it for the first time with me, and later on after he had went home, he messaged me and he was like, you know, that movie wasn't so much scary, but like, it freaked me out. It was disturbing. And that's definitely what I would say about it. Very disturbing. One thing that I want to give credit to the movie too is the fact that I think it has one of the best genuine jump scares of all time. That being this scene.
Sally, I hear something. Stop. Stop.
Because it's so well done, because one, it's not a fake jump scare, and two, it's genuinely terrifying, you know, going through the woods and this big ass guy with a chainsaw and a human face on his face comes out and just starts butchering you with a chainsaw. Absolutely terrifying, and I feel like it is a very effective scare, and it just adds to the tension of everything instead of just getting rid of it like a lot of the cheap jump scares out there. And of course, the whole thing with this being based on real events and whatnot, that's false. There's very obvious inspiration from Ed Gein, but it doesn't really go beyond some very simple story details, and obviously stuff like the furniture made from bones and wearing human skin and stuff like that. There was no chainsaw. This didn't happen in Texas. that we know of. There wasn't a Leatherface, and it's kind of funny to me that people still think that to this day about this movie, when it's just not true. And I feel like between this movie claiming that and then the remake doing the same thing and also having what was supposedly real footage with the black and white stuff just added to that. This movie had quite the impact though. This is one of the big movies that really helped start the slasher stuff. Obviously you had Psycho in the 60s, but this movie was a big one, especially with setting up sort of the archetype of the killer in movies like this, which of course was added onto by Halloween 4 years later. And Leatherface is one of the biggest horror icons out there, and this is a very well-known series, even though I would argue that most of the movies following haven't been all that great, because obviously this spawned a franchise with numerous sequels, remakes, different timelines, so some sequels supposedly count and others don't, just depending on which ones you're looking at. You know, comics, there is a, at the moment, upcoming video game, but I really feel like none of the other movies, except for maybe the remake, have been able to truly capture that just grit and kind of just nastiness of this original movie that makes it so disturbing. And even then, it's in a different way and to a lesser extent than this movie. I honestly do believe that this is one of the greatest horror movies of all time and still works today, and like I said before, it is my personal favorite horror movie. No matter how many times I watch it, I don't get tired of it, and it still kind of gets me. It's one that I've loved showing to different people that haven't seen it or haven't seen it in a while, because I have had quite a few friends that I have watched this movie with that said, oh wow, like that actually freaked me out. But tell me, what do you think about the Texas Chain Saw Massacre? Do you like it? Do you still think it works today? Where does it rank among your favorite horror movies or horror franchises? And where does Leatherface rank as a horror icon? Let me know down in the comments. Once again, I want to say happy Halloween, everyone. As always, I want to give a big thanks to everyone for watching, and have a good one.